Hi there. I'm going to tell you about how to cite your sources for all the research that you're going to put in your career report. So it's good to keep in mind that this report is just a display of all the research that you've done. So I'm expecting that most of this paper, if not all of this paper, is going to come from the research that you've conducted. It's not going to be your own information. So your paper is going to be full of citations and full of research. So you have to ask yourself, okay, how do you cite all these sources? How do you give credit for all this research that you've done? Well, there's two different places in your report where you give that information. One of them is at the very end of the report on the works cited page, and the other is within the text, letting me know which particular information came from which particular source. Okay? If you notice in the notes packet, you have these two pages. One of them outlines how to write a works cited page and how to list parenthetical references. So how to list the sources at the end of your paper, and then also how to list that information about that source or those sources within the text, within the draft of your work. This other page gives just general rules about quoting and paraphrasing, your two options for incorporating your research. So, as it says here, the rule for quoting and paraphrasing is do not overquote. Okay? Whenever in doubt, paraphrase. Now that's kind of the opposite of what I've been telling you for the in-class essays. The in-class essays you wanted to directly quote, right, using the author's words, word for word when you could. But in the career report, you actually want to paraphrase that research. You want to paraphrase that information. You're going to be giving so many different types of information about this career from so many different sources. It's much easier for your reader if you are consistent in the voice. So that means instead of jumping around from one author's quote to another author's quote, it's good if you can paraphrase that information in your own words so that that voice is consistent throughout the text, throughout your report. Okay, so whether you paraphrase, which means you don't use direct quotes, but you take that author's information or that source's information and you translate it in your own words. So whether you paraphrase or directly quote, you're still going to give a citation for that information, because whether you've said it in your own words or left it in the author's words, it's still not your information, right? So you want to give credit to that source. And that's what this page is talking about. When you're writing your research reports, there's only 4 instances when it's okay to directly quote. When it's the information that is stated in a memorable way, when it uses technical terminology specific to the subject. So especially in the case of writing definitions for things, especially your career report or the career, you probably can't change that language because it's so specific to that career that that's okay to directly quote. Another instance when you can directly quote, when it's okay to directly quote in your research reports, is when the information is the source talking about itself. For example, your interviews, right? They're giving you their information, their personal perspective with this career or about this career. So that's okay to directly quote because we want to get a sense of their language and their voice. Or when the information comes from an expert whose name lends authority to your essay. Because when you directly quote this information, you want to write that lead-in phrase using that author's credentials. Okay, makes sense? So we always want to err on the side of paraphrasing, not directly quoting. You can directly quote in these 4 instances, but it's never wrong to paraphrase. It's not wrong to paraphrase when they're using jargon and try and change it into your own language. It's not wrong to paraphrase from your interview or in any of these other situations when it's okay to directly quote. You could always paraphrase instead. On this other page, you have information about how to set up a works cited page, which is a list of the sources that you've actually used information from in your draft. A bibliography is different. A bibliography looks at all of the sources that you've even checked out, whether or not you used information from that source in your draft. So a bibliography keeps track of your research, whereas a works cited page lists only those sources that you've pulled information from and included in your draft. So as that says right here, a works cited page is its own separate page at the end of the research report. It lists the sources in alphabetical order. It's double spaced throughout. It begins at the left margin for each new source. It follows MLA format or any other style format. There's others like APA and Chicago, but for our class, we're always going to use MLA, right? And you can find MLA format in those other places that I said in the MLA video. Entries are not numbered, nor do they begin with a bullet, and it's titled Works Cited when you have more than one source listed there. So let's see an example of a works cited page. So here we have one of the model essays that's in the notes packet. It's Kimberly Gutierrez's essay, The Devil is in the Details. And here we have our works cited page, and we're just going to check it for all of the qualities that we were just looking at on that page about works cited pages. So she has her last name and page number in the top right-hand corner because it does continue on from the rest of the report. So all of the other information is on pages 1 through 10, and here she has started her works cited page as its own page. It's a separate page at the end of the report. We notice that all of her sources are listed alphabetically, and she knows to put the author's last name, first name, period, title in quotation marks. She finds that format, that MLA format, either by looking at an MLA style manual, she finds it on the library research guide, she goes online to the library, and that lists the MLA format, all those different places that I've told you in that MLA video. So she writes it in the format, and she lists each source alphabetically, right? She knows that this is the information she's going to give for this type of source, right? She knows that she's going to put this first, summary, and it's going to be in quotation marks. And whatever the first word is, that's what she uses to list these sources alphabetically. So it's alphabetical. It doesn't have any bullets before them. It doesn't have any numbers. She didn't number these sources, right? We know that she started a new source because it begins on the very left of the page, right? On the left side. When it runs on to a second line, a third line, or a fourth line, she indents each of those lines so that we know these lines belong to this source, okay? Notice how she evenly double spaces throughout, right? She doesn't triple space between this source and this source. It's all evenly double spaced. Okay, and it's also titled Works Cited, not Work, because there's more than one work listed. Okay, now we get to writing parenthetical references. So we see at the end of her page, or her paper, we have this works cited page, right? That's one place where she's listed all of her sources that she's pulled information from. Now when she includes the parenthetical references, sometimes called in-text citations because they come within the text, she is going to list, with using parenthetical references, which of these sources each particular information that she gives comes from. Okay, so if we take a look at her draft, we look within the text, and she's got these parentheses, parenthetical parentheses. She's got these parenthetical references, these set of parentheses, all throughout her draft, right? Because all this information came from sources. Of course, it's a research report. It's not her own information. So, sorry. So what she needs to do is every time she's given information from a source, she needs to say where that specific information comes from this list of sources, right? And so what she's going to do is she's going to list the first word for that source that comes on the Works Cited page. That's what she's going to put in the parentheses. Okay, so if we notice, if we go back to the first one, we see Young Ortemeyer, right? We go back to the Works Cited page and we're able to see very quickly that she has Young, that's the first word, and then she also put this other author last name, because as the page in the notes packet tells us, if you have two sources, two authors, sources with two or more authors, you list each author's last name and then the page number, okay? Which is what she has done. So we know that there's two authors for this source, Young and Ortemeyer, and then she's listed the page number, okay? We know that all this information that comes before it, she's listed here as coming from this source. Okay. If we look at the next one, she's got Young Ortemeyer 2, Young Ortemeyer 3, right? All of this information comes from this source. On this page, same source on a different page. Okay. We see Kamenson 3. We know that all this information comes from this source, and we could actually find more information or read more about the details about this information that's covered in this source if we go to the source itself. So we'd go to Kamenson. We're looking for that on the Works Cited page. Kamenson, Blythe. We could check out this source and find even more information and continue finding information from that source. And she's listed it very simply, very clearly in the text with a parenthetical reference so that we can be directed very clearly and very simply back to that source as she's listed it on the Works Cited page. Okay, so when you're putting your citations together, the first step is to create a Works Cited page according to these instructions that are outlined here, right? And then to go back through the draft and note every place you've put information from a source and then say which source it is. And you let me know the first word from that source and the page number if you have one, just as it outlines here about parenthetical references. Now there's some tricky situations like this one. Both of these sources, they're different sources, but they both start with the same word. So what would you put? You'd put the first word exactly as it appears on the Works Cited page, like this one's in quotation marks. These are not. But you'd put the first word and then the first word that makes them different. So she would put forensic experts, forensic science, and the page numbers for each. Okay? So to review, remember that you want to consult these pages in the notes packet that talk about how to create a Works Cited page and creating parenthetical references. And the first step in citing your sources of your research papers is to create a Works Cited page following MLA or any other style format that your instructor tells you. In our case, it's MLA. And then go back and figure out what comes first for each source and know that that would go in the parenthetical reference, and then go back through your text, your rough draft, and put in those citations.